In a small park just outside the United Nations headquarters in New York, there's an inscription which says, "Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." This is a passage from the Bible, from the book of Isaiah, which neatly encapsulates the main aspiration of the United Nations, ending war. This goal is also expressed at the very beginning of the UN Charter, which begins, "We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war." On the 24th of February 2022, the Russian Federation, a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, blew a giant, gaping hole into that primary aspiration. By launching a unilateral and unprovoked invasion of its neighbor, Ukraine, Russia made a mockery of the UN Charter and brought the scourge of war to Europe for the first time in a generation. To add insult to injury, Russia then used its position on the Security Council to prevent the UN from holding it to account. Whatever consequences Russia will face for its actions in Ukraine, it will need to come from outside the UN system. This was not the first time that a powerful country has flouted the founding principles of the United Nations. My own home country, the United States, has done it several times. But Russia's invasion is, in my opinion, the most flagrant breach of the post-World War II international consensus to date. The UN has never functioned particularly smoothly and has now been exposed as totally inadequate when it comes to its most important mission, preventing war. I would argue that the world now has three choices. Limp along with the broken United Nations as we have for the last 80 years. Stop pretending that the UN is able to secure or establish peace and just get rid of it. Or replace the UN or radically reform it with a much more powerful world body with real power to hold nations to account, which can pass meaningful legislation and have the power to enforce it, which has the power to stop wars from starting, and which can tackle other global issues like the environment and global pandemics. Now, this would effectively be a world government, which I know scares a lot of people, and to be honest, it kind of scares me, but that's what this video is about. The movement for a single, united, world federal government, a concept known as World Federalism. Now, this isn't a movement that I fully support, at least not yet, but I take it seriously. For reasons I will explain a bit later, I think we have to. And you won't just be hearing from me. We're going to hear from a prominent World Federalist and several other YouTubers who you may know, who will tell you what they think of this idea. Let's do this. Roll the music. Hi everyone, I'm Fredo Rockwell, and although for many years I've described myself as a world citizen, I've never given much serious thought to the idea of an actual world government. That is until recently. This is a big topic. It's so big I can only begin to scratch the surface in this single video. So let me set out the points which I'm going to cover. First, we're going to talk about what World Federalism is, then an outline of the movement and its history, next why it might be a good idea, and then why it might be a bad idea, and then we're going to hear reactions from other people to the idea of World Federalism, including some YouTubers you might know. And lastly, I'm going to tell you why I think this is an issue that we can't ignore. Okay, let's get started. In its simplest form, the core proposal of World Federalism is that the countries of the world should unite into a single, united, democratic federation, which would have the power of a real government and would have responsibility for dealing with global issues. I've already mentioned the three most obvious global issues it would deal with: global health emergencies, the environment, and preventing war. This would mean that, in effect, instead of there being nearly 200 totally independent and sovereign nations in the world, there would be just one, which would have a single democratic government with a federal structure. The 190-odd independent countries which we know today would continue to exist. Nations would continue to deal with purely national issues. But there would be this additional global layer of government, where ultimate sovereignty would reside. An important principle in most World Federalist platforms is called subsidiarity, which is the idea that decisions should be made at the lowest level of government possible. This means that the decision of where exactly to put a stop sign on a particular street would be taken at the neighborhood or city government level, not by the World Parliament. And oh yeah, a World Federalist system would have one of those, a World Parliament. How exactly this might work depends entirely on who you ask. Because you see, World Federalism is not a single monolithic movement. But one thing that pretty much every World Federalist agrees on is that the current United Nations system is not working. And the Security Council system, where a handful of countries make all the decisions for everyone else, is not how a World Federalist system should work. Getting more specific about what World Federalism is all about is difficult because, you see, there are dozens, hundreds maybe, of different organizations which, over decades, have advocated and lobbied for a world federal government. Each group has a slightly different idea of how a possible world federation in the future might work. And the reason that there are so many groups with so many competing ideas is that world federalism is an idea with a long history. The idea of a world government is truly ancient. I mean, that's what Alexander the Great was trying to do. But the idea of a modern worldwide governance system began in earnest in the 1800s, with the establishment of the world's first international organizations, like the International Committee of the Red Cross in 1863, and the International Telecommunication Union in 1865. Yes, we take it for granted today that we can just pull a phone out of our pocket and call anyone in the world, but this is only possible because there is a worldwide governance system for this, which has been in place for one form or another for the last 150 years. But it was really after the horrors of the Second World War, which of course came hot on the heels of the horrors of the First World War, when the World Federalist movement that we know today really began to take shape. In 1947, in the Swiss city of Montreux, over 50 World Federalist organizations from 24 countries held a conference to form an umbrella group called the World Movement for World Federal Government. And although this umbrella group has evolved over time and changed its name to the World Federalist Movement, or WFM, it continues to be the main World Federalist body today. The most prominent members of the WFM are Citizens for Global Solutions, a US-based group, the World Citizens Association of Australia, Democracy Without Borders, and the Young World Federalists, which is the group which first contacted me, quite a while ago actually, and asked me to make this video about world federalism. Not every group which advocates a world federalist government is actually a member of the WFM. One which I particularly like, which is outside the WFM system, is the World Service Authority, which will set you up with a world passport if you want one. But in my opinion, many, if not most, of the organizations which sit outside the WFM tend to be kinda loopy. As I said before, there isn't complete unanimity about what a possible world federation might be like. But there is a consensus that it would be democratic and, of course, it would be federal, with lots of member states who continue to maintain control over their own national issues. But that's about it as far as consensus goes. There's even less consensus about how a possible world federation might come about. From what I've read, there are 4 possible paths for a future world government. The first is that existing international structures like the World Court, the World Trade Organization, and the United Nations will continue to grow and develop over time, and that gradually a single global government will evolve into place. This is sort of how the European Union has emerged. It began in 1951 as the European Coal and Steel Community. Over time it morphed into the European Community and then the European Union, gradually gaining a parliament and new powers and areas of responsibility as it grew. In my opinion, it's really easy to see something like this happening at a global scale. Eventually, I mean. There's a real downside to this evolutionary approach, however. There's a really good chance that any political system which evolved over time like this would end up being really complicated and kinda weird. For example, despite having an elected parliament, the European Union is really run by a bunch of unelected bureaucrats. And the system is so complicated that hardly anybody understands it. But this complexity and lack of democratic accountability constantly calls the legitimacy of EU laws into question. Some advocate a world federation which develops in continental chunks, starting with the EU, the African Union, the Union of South American nations, and so on, which then over time merge together into a single union. I don't find this idea very persuasive, however. Other than the EU, none of these continental organizations are really all that effective or stable. The Union of South American Nations, for example, recently collapsed. Another similar idea is that all of the genuinely free democracies in the world, like the US, Japan, EU members, Australia, the UK, unite into one federation now and then start admitting new members as they become free democracies in future. with the ultimate goal that eventually the entire world will join this single union. And again, I don't see this idea as particularly workable. It's easy to see the world splitting into two distinct camps, the countries inside the world government and the countries on the outside of the world government. And I can imagine that being a really divisive situation. And it also sort of assumes that every country in the world is moving towards democracy. And I would say there are dozens of countries in the world where that's far from clear. The most idealistic plan for the countries of the world to unite into a single world federation is to do it in one swift movement. This would definitely allow the world to sidestep the many problems that the other paths to unity would have. But it's really hard to see this happening. I mean, maybe if there's some sort of enormous global crisis or an alien invasion, maybe then it could happen. It's really hard to see countries like the US and China spontaneously deciding to unite, short of something like Independence Day, I mean. The advantages to a world government are pretty clear. If there was only one country on the entire Earth, that would pretty much end war. Or at least it would mean that the only remaining wars would be civil wars, which are still really terrible, but these tend not to happen inside democratic countries. So presumably if the World Federation was indeed democratic, these wouldn't happen so often. It would also make it much easier to have unified global environmental and public health policies. And, one would hope, a global government could bring freedom and prosperity to parts of the world that don't have freedom and prosperity today. These would be huge gains. And given what's going on in Ukraine today, the idea that wars like this would no longer be possible is extremely appealing. But any discussion of world federalism has to acknowledge that for many people around the world, the idea of a single world government is, frankly, terrifying. I mean, there's a reason that world federalism remains on the margins of political discourse. For many people, it is the stuff of nightmares. Now, there are lots of conspiracy theories that prey on the fear of a worldwide government. But also, have you ever noticed that in the movies or on TV, if someone's taking over the world, it's always the bad guy? For example, in Marvel's recent and already largely forgettable series, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the bad guys were the Flag Smashers, a group which wanted to eliminate national governments and which had the slogan, "One World, One People." What the Flag Smashers were actually trying to accomplish wasn't at all clear, but the series relied on an old assumption seen in the media everywhere. If you want to dismantle national boundaries and unite the world, you're evil. So why is the idea of a world government so terrifying for so many people? I mean, for me, I find state power in general pretty terrifying. When a government does something unjust, arbitrary, or even criminal, it's extremely difficult, even impossible, to hold it to account. This is, ironically, an argument for world federalism, because with a world federal government, there would be an additional layer of government to hold national governments to account. But who would hold the world government to account when it does something terrible? Which it almost certainly would, given enough time. In other words, who watches the watchers? The fact is that governments, once they're in place, are nearly impossible to get rid of. Once the countries of the world have ceded meaningful sovereignty to an international, global government, it's very hard to see how they would ever get it back. And if that world government was ever seized in a coup, or fell under the control of a populist demagogue, well, there'd be nowhere else to turn. In a united world, there is no other country to seek refuge in, or get support from. And that's kinda scary. But that's enough for me. Let's hear from some other people. Okay, I've got a real treat for you now. 4 highly talented YouTubers have sent me short videos with their reactions to this idea of world federalism, and they're from all over the world. I'd encourage you to go and subscribe to all of them after you finish watching this video, of course. You can find links in the description and in the pinned comment. First up, we have Lucas Bender from Germany.
Sure, world federalism, start with something small. Imagine if there was some political movement in, like, Uganda that has a serious gripe with the international government. I would never hear from that, unless, like, a German newspaper picks it up from an international English one, who got it from a local English one, and on and on and on, until we had the original source in Swahili from, like, 4 months ago. And that's not unsolvable, or even the worst problem I can come up with, but it does illustrate how hard it would be to communicate with an international government. A world government would be so hard to interact with as a citizen. You want to talk to your MP in Parliament? Well, too bad, they're responsible for like 1 billion people. You don't like a policy? Too bad the people in the important countries are for it, so whoop-dee-doo. That's it. If we could make it work with some sci-fi technology, yep, sign me up, I'm all for that. I just don't see how you could keep it together.
Our second video is from arkentheamerikan, who is from America.
When it comes to the idea of world federalism, I do think it's kind of inevitable, given the whole preceding history of our species. You know, small farming communities became city-states, city-states became kingdoms and empires, those in turn became nation-states, and at this point in history, nation-states are banding together into all sorts of international organizations and agreements. So I think one form or another of international government is going to happen at some point. But I don't think it is possible right now, and if it is, then I don't think it's desirable. World government is practically impossible so long as there are major powers like China, Russia, Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, etc., which are autocratic. Autocrats by their nature want to maintain and expand their own power, and almost any alliance between dictatorships is purely strategic, and usually has a pretty obvious expiration date. There's no such thing as a stable alliance with an autocracy. Democratic countries, on the other hand, are able to ally based on shared interests and values, and those alliances are able to hold for decades or even centuries because, unlike authoritarian states, democratic ones mutually benefit from allying with one another. Ideally, we will eventually reach a point where there are no powerful autocracies left in the world, and at that point, the road towards world federalism will be fairly clear. But until that point, and that's probably centuries in the future, it just isn't going to happen.
This next video is from a real up-and-coming YouTube star named Bamise, who is from Nigeria.
Who stands to benefit from the creation of a global government? It's not Africa. This may sound inconsequential, but a global government is not in the best interest of the continent. Places like Europe, China, Russia, and the United States have developed systems and institutions that will be able to benefit significantly from the resource control and distribution on a scale that has never been seen before. Something that Africa may be excluded from, either due to the lack of infrastructures or institutions that will be able to capitalize on this opportunity. This is not because Africa has corrupt government, who doesn't, but rather because of the centuries of exploitation the continent has endured. Some rare earth metals on the device you're probably watching this video on were most likely mined in Congo and exported through a WTO supervised and regulated network. Yet Congolese miners are unpaid fairly. Their children probably don't have access to schools, healthcare, or worse, dug up the minerals themselves. You may be tempted to argue that a global government will be able to provide schools, infrastructure, roads, healthcare, and so many things, essentially doing a better job running and fixing up Africa. But remember, this was the same justification used by Europeans when they colonized the continent. They were bringing civilization, but ended up exploiting the continent for all it was worth. Africa has frequently been left alone, blamed for problems it did not cause, and denied the assistance it desperately requires. The power balance is tilted against Africa, and a global government at this point would simply exacerbate the situation and be damaging to the continent's development and long-term progress. Perhaps one day when circumstances improve, we can talk about the global government, but for the time being, Africa has the least to gain, but the most to lose.
And the last YouTube contribution I have is from my friend Moki Ben, who runs a channel called MBTV. He is from Bougainville, which is an island which is currently part of Papua New Guinea, but is set to become an independent country sometime between 2025 and 2027. So I was really excited to have Moki join us because this is a part of the world we often don't hear perspectives from. So here we go.
All right, this is Moki Ben from the MBTV YouTube channel. So in this short video from the Melanesian perspective, I'll be talking about what I think of having the idea of one federal form of government across the entire globe. So if you look into the Pacific Island countries, currently we have West Papua and we have Bougainvillean and we have New Caledonia, which are trying to break away from their parent governments. And their main reason why they want to break away is that they are from a different cultures being put together by the colonial governments. That's why the cultures continue to be clashed and they can no longer be together. So, with the idea of having one federal form of government across the entire globe, the question is how can we put these conflicting societies together? We have currently Israel and Palestinian conflict that is going on, and with the idea of this one federal form of government across the entire world, how can we put these conflicting societies together? So, when you are talking about the one federal form of government across the world, you're talking about other people from other countries coming into your country and taking away your job opportunities and business opportunities. So perhaps the idea of federal form of government across the entire world can work in terms of having one currency across the world, but I don't think it can work by putting people from the different cultures together.
I'm so pleased with the contributions from these 4 YouTubers, from Lucas, Arken, Bamise, and Moki. Thank you guys so much. Please go and check out their channels. Next, we're going to hear from an actual live World Federalist. Okay, so I'm really delighted to welcome Eston McKeague to the video. He's the president of the Young World Federalists, and he's seen my video up to this point and the contributions from the 4 fellow YouTubers. Welcome, Eston. And yeah, so what do you think?
I think it's great. Yeah, I really love the video so far. It's an excellent video, great overview of the topic and all the concepts, and I really love all the commentary from the other people as well. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me.
So even though I think most of us see it as something that's overall broadly very positive in theory, we have a lot of worries and concerns about the practice. You're not offended by that?
No, of course not. I think that's pretty normal. I'm very, very much used to that, used to people having concerns or questions.
I guess the idea that that some of the others brought up were we are not a united culture, that the news medias are all siloed all around the world, and that it's very difficult to have like an ongoing public discourse as a world, and that the world parliament, like your MP, depending on how many there are, might be responsible for like 10, 20 million people. I don't know. It seems slightly unworkable in a practical sense.
And that's sort of touching on, you know, the makeup of the global democracy. You know, what will the global democracy look like? And there's a lot of different answers for that. I think a lot of World Federalists, while they want to reform global governance, they also want to reform democracy itself. And so a lot of us are really interested in new forms of democracy and representation and things like that, and decision-making, collective decision-making. And one of the pathways that you didn't really address that much when you laid out all the pathways to world federalism is sort of this grassroots global democracy that could involve like citizens' assemblies and deliberative democracy and liquid democracy and things like that. But then also like e-democracy and online voting and harnessing the power of technology and all that sort of futuristic stuff. And all those boundaries that you just laid out basically come down, and we're able to talk about global issues, you know, as citizens of Earth, really as equals.
So there's one thing I didn't really address, I only alluded to very briefly, and that's that there are a lot of conspiracy theories about global governance and world government. Do people ask you about that a lot? Do you get accused of things? And are you part of some sort of secret cabal? You don't look like you are, but
I was waiting for you to ask. Yeah, we are fully funded by George Soros and the Clinton Foundation. No, we obviously joke about it. Our April Fool's Day joke usually involves something like that, where we talk about how we're part of like the space lizards or something like that. Or it's we laugh about it, but at the same time we do have to like be super secure and safe online because of that.
Yeah, that's a shame. My impression is that you guys, you're open about the fact that this is a very, very big potential project, that it's going to be very difficult to achieve, that there are lots of complicated questions, and that there are multiple different ways that it could be approached, but you want to kind of keep it in the forefront of public discussion and get people to talk about it more seriously. That's, I mean, at the moment, is that the main goal of Young World Federalists and your corner of the World Federalist movement?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so we really focus on youth engagement. So we try to get young people in cities or in universities around the world to either like start a club or a chapter or get involved as a volunteer and really start to talk to their friends and hold events with all the global issues that we're currently living through. my job in encouraging people to join this movement has never been easier. I've watched just in these last few years as more and more people have gotten involved, as I just have sat back and I'm not even doing anything. People realize that this is not necessarily the answer, but this is a tool that can give us, what we need to find the answers together as a united species. It's very important that world federalism is understood to be a decolonial process. And just like you've pointed out, with how certain members of the Security Council, essentially the victors of the Second World War, have all this power in global governance, that's essentially the system that we're trying to reform. Because right now, global governance and decision-making is asymmetric, and power is in the hands of the few. As a movement, we really seek to diversify the movement and really grow it around the world. I mean, world federalism must be a global movement. Otherwise, it's completely delegitimate and doesn't make any sense.
Wow. Okay. So that's a really good point, and I hadn't really thought of it in those terms. I really, really appreciate you coming to talk to us. I'm really glad that you generally have a positive reaction to the video. I just wanted to thank you guys for getting in touch with me and asking me to do this, because I wouldn't have thought of it otherwise. And it's been really interesting.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
So earlier on, I mentioned that I would eventually explain why I think the idea of world federalism is something that everybody should at least be talking about. In the long run, given enough time, I think a world government of some sort is essentially inevitable. It may take hundreds of years. I'm not at all sure it's going to happen in my lifetime, but I think it probably will happen. Here's why. Although the system of world governance which we have today seems totally inadequate, it does exist. And it exists because I think global governance provides three obvious advantages. Economies tend to grow faster when there is global free trade. Technologies are increasingly making international communication easier and need a global framework. And even though countries like Russia start wars to pursue a national interest, most countries, most of the time, tend to see a genuine national interest in peace. If we look at the global governance bodies which are in place today, many, if not most of them, were started to address one of these three issues. The World Trade Organization promotes free trade, the International Telecommunications Union and other bodies standardize global communications, and the Red Cross, the International Criminal Court, and yes, the UN, promote peace. Add in the very real desire to have a coordinated global response to climate change and pandemics, and there's every reason to think that over time, these organizations will begin to grow stronger and hopefully more effective. Now, I think this is going to take a long time, and I'm sure many people watching this video will be extremely skeptical of this idea. But it's undeniable that the global governance structure that we have in place today would have been unimaginable 100 years ago. So take a moment and consider how this system might progress over another 100 years, or 200 years. Such an evolutionary approach to world government is, as I mentioned before, something that would almost undoubtedly be very messy. Just look at the EU that we have today and imagine that on a worldwide scale. Rather than just waiting and seeing what will happen, I think it's much better that the idea of a world government be discussed widely today. Not just whether the idea is good or bad, but how would a world government function? What safeguards would need to be in place? How can we ensure that minorities of all kinds, ethnic, linguistic, religious, and even political, will be fairly treated? To me, if such a system is coming, and I do think it will come eventually, having an open conversation about it and how it might work just makes sense. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please give it a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next video.